So creativity is a really commonly used word, but I think the downside of that is that we all have some intuitions about what creativity means and what it is, and they may be very sound common sense intuitions, but they're not necessarily correct. And so, Jeff, what are some myths you've heard about creativity as you've talked about it over the years?
The one that always gets me is the light bulb. Right? It's a light bulb that goes off.
Right.
Right? I mean, there are lots of them, though, that you have to be a creative person. You're born with
some kind of genius.
Some kind of genius or craziness or something like that. Or there's a lot about randomness. Things just happen, or you happen to notice something, or
yeah, it's interesting. All these examples seem to involve the idea that creativity is somehow out of our control. But that's not necessarily the case, is it?
It's something that happens to you. No, it's a process. It's a skill you can learn. We can get better at this.
Right. So clearly, we need to do some myth busting before we move forward, right?
A little bit of myth busting.
Great. Another myth that we've heard a lot about is that creativity is something that happens to us as opposed to being something we do, right? So we're just vessels of divine inspiration, right? That just comes to us from the muses, like from above, right?
Lightning strikes, you're unconscious, just offers something up out of nowhere, things like that. But it's wrong on every level, right? So the first one is that things that happen suddenly, right? Creative aha moments. But that's nuts, right? Think about it. You lose your keys, you lose your phone, and you run around your house, and then eventually you go, oh, that's where I left my phone. Well,
or sometimes you don't.
Fair enough. But that's a sudden insight, but it's not creative.
Yeah, and a lot of times these sudden insights, seemingly quote unquote sudden insights, happen after years and years of training and preparation, right? So just, you put the last piece in the puzzle and it feels like, it fits and that feels like an insight, right? But you've spent hours fitting together all of the other pieces to make that happen. And so it's really not quite as sudden as it seems.
Right, yeah, chance favors the prepared mind, and we're just not powerless bystanders to our own creativity. There are things we can do.
Another tempting myth is to view creativity as something that is purely random, right? It's just the old lightning strikes kind of
roll the dice
view of this, right? And there are a lot of important inventions, like everything from the Post-it note to penicillin to chocolate chip cookies, right?
Popsicles,
were actually invented partially as a result of random events. But there are a couple of problems with this perspective. One is that it's incredibly inefficient to rely on randomness and hope that it's going to systematically generate creative ideas. So
monkeys typing Shakespeare.
So relying on that as your creativity strategy is probably not such a good idea. The second problem is that we have to be able to recognize random events that are important, right? And for that, it requires insight. And so randomness is only interesting for creativity insofar as it is recognized and used, right? So there is some, it's a really limiting point of view to think of creativity as random.
But it's also that it's a mistake to think of it as just that every idea is equally thinkable, and is it just that we're going to stumble upon it? So the way I think about riddles, right? So, okay, now I get to tell you a riddle, right? So, okay, what grows up while growing down?
Yeah.
All right, so there's one, and you're probably thinking, I don't know what to think, right? Right,
and I will tell you what I'm thinking.
so the idea is that there's so many possibilities, you don't know what to think, but it's important to distinguish between sort of what I know and don't know, and what's currently just not conceivable. What's literally framed out of the picture in this case. So what grows up while growing down? I don't know. What goes up? Stairs. Stairs go up and down, but they don't really grow. Okay, that's not right. Well, maybe plants, right? So plants grow up, and they have roots that grow down. So maybe that's an answer to the riddle. Or maybe there's a plant like a carrot, right? A carrot actually grows further down as it gets bigger. So maybe that grows up, while growing down. And so
there's a process of playing with ideas and seeing what fits. And is there at the end of the process, you can pick something that it seems like random, you picked it and it's correct? Right?
Yeah, but also that But well, in thinking about it that way, we have completely disregarded other possibilities.
Right.
So let me give you a totally different direction on the same riddle, right?
Yeah.
Which is, well, grows up while growing down. Well, down means a direction down, but down also means feathers, right?
Ah.
So goose, right? A goose grows up, that is, gets bigger, while growing down, as in feathers.
Right.
And while I'm thinking about the plants and the carrots, the goose one is completely inconceivable.
Right.
Because it's a totally different way to think about the riddle.
And as we've seen, we've sort of immediately formed a perspective on what down is, and that precludes us from seeing other perspectives and changing our view of the problem, right?
And that's the problem with noticing. That randomness can happen, but you
Right.
framed out, and it's inconceivable to you to think about it
Right.
in that way, and you'll never see it.
Right, and so down could be falling from the sky, and I don't notice it. It's random, right?
Right,
But I need
right.
insight to actually see how it fits into the bigger picture.
That's right.
And we also want, to give you a more systematic process for being creative on a regular basis, right, as opposed to just relying on random events.
Chance isn't enough.
Right. Another myth we've heard is that creativity is somehow all about personality, that in order to be creative, you have to be one of these eccentric lone geniuses with crazy hair that really doesn't have any friends. It is emotionally unstable, right? We've all heard those kinds of stereotypes. But in fact, what we really want to argue here is that, and convey, is that creativity is also a process, and it's a skill that you can learn. And that once you understand how to be creative, everyone can learn to be more creative, and it doesn't depend on your particular personality. It's also the case that being creative also depends on the context in which you work. And so you can engineer the context to make everybody more creative than they ordinarily would be. So creativity is not just about having a particular kind of eccentric personality. Another tempting myth is to view creativity as just purely a matter of intelligence, right? So if we know how to measure IQ, so let's just hand out an IQ test and we can figure out who's likely to be creative and who isn't. And there's actually some evidence to suggest that might not be the best way to go about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think after you hit about 115, 120 on the IQ scale, there's no difference in eminent creators and IQ. So there might be some intelligence to make world famous creative endeavors, but after
so
that,
you need enough smarts to know things, right? To master your area.
Oh, that's a
but
good
past
point.
a certain point, the most creative person isn't necessarily the smartest one in the room. There's something else going on.
And smarts, we have a few different views of smarts, right? Sort of raw IQ, horsepower, and then there's sort of domain knowledge. I mean, there's this great story about Murray Gell-Mann, the physicist, Nobel Prize-winning physicist.
Right.
He's giving lectures on everything. I mean, just an incredibly intelligent, well-read guy. His car breaks down with a news reporter in the middle of the desert, and he says, it must have overheated. And he gets out a bottle of water, pops the hood, and the reporter says, let's wait for the tow truck before Murray Gell-Mann emptied the water bottle into the engine of the car, right? So I don't care how smart you are, like you
need knowledge.
You need knowledge.
Yeah, you need to know what you're doing, right?
Yeah. And that's separate, again, from can I change how I'm thinking about the situation?
Right. And so understanding the underlying process of creativity is, again, important for understanding how this works. That if it's about changing perspectives, even the smartest people can get locked into their perspectives and not be able to get out, right?
Absolutely.
And so we need to look at creativity as something that's a little bit more complex than just raw IQ.
Yeah, well, Asimov, right? A famously smart guy, Isaac Asimov, like IQ of 160, and he wrote I don't know, hundreds of books on every topic under the sun. So he tells this story in his autobiography of going to take his car in for repair. I'm on car repair today. You're stuck with me
You're
now,
having car trouble,
right? Right? And so his mechanic says, "All right, Doc, you're really smart. So here's one for you, right? A deaf and mute guy walks into the hardware store and goes like this, right? And so the guy at the store brings him a hammer and he wiggles his fingers, he brings him some nails, right? He gets what he needs, right? So, okay, now a guy who's blind walks in looking for scissors, what does he do? And Asimov reports going like this, right? And the car repairman says, he's blind. He just says, can I have scissors, please?
So smart people can get stuck just as easily as anyone else, right? And so, smart people don't have a monopoly on creativity. There's a lot more to it than that.
And you got to be able to switch perspectives.
Standing in front of the main library here at the University of Illinois reminds me of one of the big misconceptions about creativity, which is that in order to be creative, you just have to know a lot of stuff. And in this day and age, we have almost perfect access to information. We can Google whatever we want. We can go to libraries, consult encyclopedias. We can consult big sources of data. But just knowing a lot of stuff doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have any kind of insightful understanding of what we know. And creativity requires insight, not just knowing what is currently known. If we can't develop a particular perspective on that information, it's unlikely that we're going to be able to use all that information to reach creative outcomes. Another misconception is that creativity is really just about discovery. And it's true that creative insights can lead to discoveries, but it's also true that you can sort of force discoveries by randomly combining different things that you know and sort of looking under every nook and cranny and searching for solutions to problems, but doing so at random, again, without any sense of what you're looking for or why you're looking for it, or any kind of insightful understanding of what you know and why you know it. So creativity, again, doesn't just happen because you know things, and it doesn't necessarily happen through this sort of rote sort of process of combining different pieces of information. What you really need is insight. And so all of the research that's been done on creativity points to a few important conclusions. One is that we can be more creative and we can reach more creative outcomes through a deliberate process. We don't necessarily need to be creative geniuses, and we don't necessarily have to just wait around for creative insights to occur at random. And so what we're going to turn to next is really a deeper understanding of the creative process so that you can use that process and go through that process over and over again systematically to reach creative solutions in a predictable way rather than just waiting for creativity to happen. So we may have signed up for this class with a few myths about creativity that all revolve around the idea that creativity is out of our control, it's random, it's something that geniuses do. But what we really want to convey is the idea that creativity is a skill and that you can learn to be creative through a very systematic process, and that's what we're going to convey to you.
And that's what this course is all about, improving your creativity toolkit so that you can be more efficient and more effective at being creative. It's not out of your control.